What's going on, guys? It's your boy Scrub here, back again with another video, and as you can tell from the title, today we're going to be doing another one of these spooky, scary storytime type videos. You guys seem to really like them when I make them, so yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. If you guys want more of these, though, be sure to let me know in the comments section down below, so I know you guys want them, and let's go. Back in the early 90s, before cell phones were prevalent, my parents left me home alone for the first time to make a late night store run. I think I was probably about 9 years old at the time. We lived in a rural area with few neighbors, so I thought it was odd when an unfamiliar car suddenly pulled into our driveway and cut the lights. It was pitch black outside except for our front porch light and the lights on from inside the house illuminating the driveway. I was in the living room watching TV at the time. I heard the car and looked out the large bay windows, and I watched as a strange blonde man exited the car and walked up to our front door. He saw me right away through the windows. His eyes locked onto me as he lifted his finger in a come hither motion. I'd never seen him before in my life. I ran as fast as I could to my parents' bedroom at the other end of the house and locked the door and called my uncle to tell him there was a strange man wanting me to answer the door. My uncle told me to stay hidden and hung up and showed up at my house in record time, but by then the weird man at the door had disappeared. When I was younger, I used to live in a duplex in a bad neighborhood. We had this lemon tree in our tiny backyard that basically took up the entire space. The consequence of this is that people would literally climb into our backyard and steal the lemons. I mean, obviously there were people who asked, but that wasn't always the case. In particular, there was this strange lady who always came to steal them. She wasn't homeless or anything. In fact, we learned that she was the wife of somebody related from my grandpa's side. We caught her a couple times and even reported her, and I'm pretty sure she had some sort of mental thing. So one day, I'm home alone and I hear a knock at the door. I go to check the window and there she is, peering in at me. She asked me to open the door, and we had a security door at the time, so I figured why not, since I can't ignore her now that she knows that I'm home. I open the door, and of course, she wants our lemons. I tell her no, and that my parents have already talked to her before about this, and she immediately starts yelling and cursing at me, slamming the security door. I was actually pretty scared at this point, and I tell her to leave or else I'm calling the cops. She's screaming at the top of her lungs about how selfish we are and calling me names. And then I close the door, and she starts slamming on the security bars on the window, yelling. And at this point, I'm like, alright, I'm gonna call the police. When suddenly, I hear a noise from the side of the house, and I immediately realize she's trying to climb the fence into the backyard. I didn't want to go outside to face the crazy woman, so I'm just standing there stunned, not knowing what to do. And I hear some loud banging looking out the window, and then I see her just running away. Some weeks later, my grandma and grandpa had a super scary encounter with her as well. They lived about 2 blocks away, which is how we learned about the connection. Whatever that lady wanted, I hope she got her lemons, but they just weren't coming from our tree. So, before I tell you the story, you need a description of my house. We had a quarter-mile or so long driveway on about 4 acres of land. We could see all of our neighbors pretty easily, but we weren't close. When you got to the front door, it was a pair of double doors with most of the door being glass, about maybe a 4 or 6 foot wooden frame around all 4 sides with a big window in each door, plus narrow side windows to either of the doors, basically running up the entire length of them. Opening the doors, there were stairs that went to the second floor in front of you. Well, right in front of the left side of the door. Next to that was a smallish formal living room. The stairs were floating planks of wood so you could see through them to the other side, into that family room. From the family room, immediately under the stairs to the second floor, was stairs down into the basement. And at the bottom of the stairs was a bedroom that I used as my office. There's no need to describe the rest of the house for this tale, though there were some oddities and spookiness that had happened at various other places inside. At this point, my wife and I were certain the house was haunted, at least 2, 3, and maybe even 4 different ghosts, based on what we would feel and the personality with it. They were not a constant presence, and it felt like 2 of them liked us both and were generally benign or sometimes beneficial. One seemed to like me and dislike my wife, and another was the opposite, seemed to like her and dislike me. The 2 nice ones may have just been ones who had different moods, or it may have been that the other 2 were just sometimes okay with us. Whatever it is, neither my wife or I never seemed to feel more than 2 at a time. which is why we weren't sure how many there were, and if we never saw any of them, we only felt them and heard them, again leading to us not being certain if it was 2, 3, or 4 different ghosts. Anyways, back to the story. Up until now, nothing really bad had happened, and even this story isn't horrible. We had random items disappear, reappear, hear noises, and mostly could just feel them at certain times in certain places. If we hadn't talked to each other about it, I'm sure we would have just passed it off as our minds playing tricks on us. But once we talked about it, it became clear that neither of us was hallucinating, or if we were, it was a shared hallucination. This evening, my wife was out of town, visiting friends about 90 minutes away, but gone for the night, staying the night there. I was in my office working, and I began to hear a loud rumbling. My first guess was that a delivery truck just pulled up in the driveway. It sounded like a big diesel engine. I started saving what I was working on and getting ready to go upstairs, and the noise got louder. By the time I was walking to the stairs up on the main level, it sounded like a semi-truck, and I mean a big, loud semi-truck was in my driveway. Which had happened for some deliveries in the past, but I wasn't expecting anything like that, so it seemed really odd. As I started up the stairs, it got even louder, to the point where I was honestly considering if a helicopter might have just landed in my yard, but why would that happen? The walls were vibrating slightly. Pictures were bouncing against the walls. Not wildly, but enough that it was audible. At this point, I was about halfway up the steps and I started to move faster and looked back over my shoulder. Through the floating steps above me and out the window in the door, my view wasn't perfect because of the angle and the steps blocking it, but I saw black shoes, or black dark brown socks, or brown work pants. My mind went, oh, it's the UPS guy, but what is he driving that's so loud? And I turned back forward and dashed up the rest of the steps. As I got to the top and was about to turn around the guardrail to move the front door, 2 things hit me. First, I should not have been able to see those shoes. There was a 4 or 6 foot wooden base at the base of my door, and at least another inch or 3 from the bottom of the door to the top of my porch. Second, as soon as that hit me, I felt the sound explode into silence. I know that sounds weird in a way, but it's the only way I can describe it. It was like a pressure wave went through me without moving me, and it was eerily quiet. Like, no buzzing appliances, no bugs, no critters, no noise from the fairly busy roads half a mile away, nothing. And the electricity, including all lights, went off in that same instant. So I was left with an ominous silence and dark, with only a bit of the twilight from the stars and a sliver of the moon lighting up the entrance to the house. I found out my house cell phone was in my hand, not sure when I had pulled it out of my pocket, but I called my wife, freaking out. I was moving, out the very same door I had just seen someone outside of. Looking back, I don't know why I didn't run to the back door. The house was dark, but I knew the way and it wouldn't have been difficult to navigate, but I was just filled with primal dread. It was coming from within as well as without. It felt like I was walking through a cloud of fear, so I ran to the door, threw it open, and went to check the breaker panel. It was all turned on. No breakers flipped. The power shouldn't have been off, but it was. My wife answered halfway down the drive. I managed to tell her what had happened by the time I reached the end. I kept her on the phone, and I don't really remember what was said, but I walked 10 miles. I wanted to be far away from the house and never even thought about going in the garage to get my car. When I had time to collect myself, I walked back to the house. The first thing I noticed was that it was lit up. Every light in the house was on, even though I hadn't had any of the upstairs lights on besides the porch light and the family room light. Before the power had gone out, the front door was shut and locked, and even though I had left it open, no neighbors would have gone in. And even if they did, how would they have locked up behind themselves? I had my keys in my pocket, so I was able to unlock my door and went inside, and everything felt normal. Maybe even a bit emptier than normal. I went down to my computer, and it had indeed restarted and warned me about not shutting down properly, just as if the power had been out. Luckily, I had saved up before getting to get up and check it out those hours ago, and as I shakily went back to work, I was still freaked out, and I was for the next couple of weeks, but nothing else odd happened for a while. A month or so later, the house was broken into and vandalized. A lot of our stuff was stolen, and over the course of the next few months and everything that had been going on, me and my wife ended up moving to a new place. It has been sold at least twice since then, and I haven't kept close tabs on it for a while. No idea if the new owners had any supernatural experiences or whatnot, but I did drive by about 5 years ago and noticed there had been a lot of work done to the place. Anyways, I really have nothing else to say about it. It doesn't sound that scary now, and like I said, I've experienced few other things in my life that are probably scarier, but nothing comes close to the sheer amount of terror I felt that night. When you're holding somebody's ears shut, you can't cover up your own. I didn't realize that for a long time, and I'm writing this to get it out of my system, or off my chest, so to speak. It's a Hail Mary effort for sure, but maybe I'll get some good advice out of this. My big brother Braun used to come into my room late at night when I was little. The visit seemed random, but would happen at least once every 3 months. I was and still am a very light sleeper, so I would wake up instantly whenever he'd open the door. He would place his finger over his lips before sitting down on the bed with me, and then he'd pull me close and place his hands over my ears. We would sit like this for an hour, and each time we would just sit, and eventually he would let go of me and go back to his own room. I tried to ask him why he kept doing this, but he never told me directly. The older I got, however, the more everything appeared to fall into place. There was only one rational explanation, and that had to have been related to our parents. Mom and Dad were a seemingly happy couple. They never fought and argued or even swore in front of my older brother and me, but maybe that's because what they were doing at night and what Braun didn't want me to hear. I started looking for signs, I suppose. Tension between my parents when us kids weren't in the room with them, well-hidden bruises, broken objects around the house, any kind of marks of a physical altercation. I was spying on them every free minute of the day, but I found nothing. All was perfectly fine and normal. Obviously, I was glad Mom and Dad actually did get along as well as they made it seem, but with that possibility ruled out, the mystery of Braun's visits remained unexplained. I could have just asked Braun what he was doing, but that's not really how a kid's mind works, or at least that wasn't how my mind worked. The way I saw it, I had to make an effort to figure out why on my own. Like all those clever young detective nerds on TV. I really did feel like a little investigator or secret agents of sorts. That's childhood innocence. For a long time, the search for my answers yielded no results. I never quite gave up on it though. Over the years, yes, this went on for years, I got better at sneaking around the house unnoticed, and I learned how to walk without making sounds. I would creep up on Braun's bedroom late at night, sometimes, and peek through the keyhole. And from what I could tell by watching him, he never got up to anything suspicious either. So if it wasn't Mom and Dad fighting and Braun being crazy, what was going on? By the way, Braun and I are roughly 3 years apart. I don't even know when I started investigating, but I do know how old I was when I finally found out. 11. I was 11 and Braun was 14. During that time, I had taken a new approach to the whole matter. I was aware Braun would visit me every other month, which meant that on those special nights, something happened in our house, or at least within earshot of it. And I obviously knew, and he wanted to keep it from me. And so far, he had been very successful in that. However, if I were to get a head start on him, I might have a chance of finding out. All I'd have to do was hide somewhere around the house, somewhere outside my room where Braun wouldn't find me. Of course, I didn't know this weird mystery thing would be transpiring, so I had to pick hiding spots at random and just hope I was lucky enough to get a good view. The downside of this plan was that since Braun's visits didn't come at a set schedule, I'd have to hide every single night and just wait for something to happen. Worse yet, I needed to be extremely cautious, because if I got caught once, my entire mission might end up being compromised. If Braun knew I was onto him, he'd probably lock me up in his room from then on or something, and either way, there were 2 hiding spots that I deemed suitable. I decided to switch between them every night to maximize my chances of witnessing the event. One was a cupboard underneath the kitchen sink. I've always been flexible, and even as a lanky 11-year-old, I could fit myself in there without difficulty. Then I would keep the door open a crack and look out. From there, I had an excellent view of the kitchen and half the dining room. The other spot was the top of the tall closet in the upstairs hallway. This lovely piece of old furniture was placed facing the staircase that led up to our bedroom from the living room downstairs. It was there that we stored all of our blankets, bed sheets, and towels so that we could walk out from their room or bathroom and take what we need. It was super accessible. The good thing was that there would always be blankets lying on top of the closet too, and if I hid underneath those, I'd have a good view of the entire living room and the front door. And on top of that, with a little bit of maneuvering, I could tell what was going on in the hallway as well. I switched between those 2 spots every night. I was extremely sneaky about it, and I would wait for Braun to come by and say goodnight like he always did until he'd return to the living room. He'd stay up longer than me and watch TV downstairs with my parents, and once I was sure nobody was paying attention, I'd crawl down the stairs into the cabinet on all fours or hide in the hallway. In the meantime, I had also acquired the key to my room and would lock it from the outside as soon as I would leave my hiding place. With that, I risked not being able to make a fast and silent return, but it would also buy me time when Braun would inevitably come to cover one of my ears. Surely he'd think I'd locked myself in because I wanted privacy, and his first course of action would be to find a way into my room instead of assuming I was elsewhere and going to look around. So I was pretty calculative with my plan. And then the night came and it finally happened. I was hiding on top of the closet door. I'm not even sure if I should be lucky I did. On one hand, if I'd been hiding in the kitchen, I would have seen little of what went down, but on the other hand, I really wish I hadn't have seen it. It started with me waiting for what felt like hours. Maybe it was hours, who knows? I could hear the TV humming away downstairs, but nobody was talking. Kind of odd. Suddenly, I heard the front door unlocked and in came my mother in high heels, a red short dress, and eye-catching hoop earrings. I had never seen her dressed up like that, and I didn't even know she was going out that night. She was laughing loudly, her bright red lipstick shining as she switched on the light in the hallway. She wasn't alone, though. A man followed her inside, about the same age as her, dressed in a nice gray suit. I had never seen him before, but he was holding her hand. She pulled him into the hallway after her, and he was laughing. I could tell he was intoxicated. Mom shut the door and smiled widely at the stranger. The TV was switched off, and Dad and Braun emerged from the back of the living room, making their way into the hallway. The stranger, who was taking off his coat, halted and turned to my mother and said, "I thought you'd be alone." She gave him a sweet grin and shrugged before turning and pressing herself up against the door to lock it. What? That's all the man could say before my dad wrapped his arm around him from behind and pressed his hand over his mouth. He was holding something white, like a handkerchief maybe, and he stuffed it into the guy's mouth. The stranger tried to reach up and remove his arms, but my father didn't let go. I stared in shock, unable to move. This wasn't really happening, was it? "Just stay still now, buddy," Dad said in a calm voice. The stranger whimpered through the gag and lowered his arms. "Braun, go take care of your sister." My older brother, who had been watching the scene with mild interest, nodded and proceeded to climb the staircase. I lowered my head, allowing the blanket that I had been peeking out to swallow me whole. Braun's footsteps moved up the stairs and towards my bedroom door. I heard him press down on the handle to find the door remained in place. My brother gave a low hum as he tried it again and again and again. The handle creaked quietly in protest, and I shipped on top of the closet and peered out. As expected, he was standing outside my room, looking alarmed and confused, and raised his hand and knocked. April, are you asleep?" No response came from the empty room. "April, can I come in, please?" Still nothing. Of course, I stayed silent as I could, hidden safely beneath the sheets. Meanwhile, the stranger was weeping downstairs, his voice muffled by the gag that Dad had stuffed into his mouth. My parents were staying still, like they were listening to what was going on upstairs, and after thinking, Braun raised and banged on the door with such force the whole floor shaked. I winced. My brother then leaned his door, pressed his ear up against it, and after a few seconds, shook his head and went downstairs. "She locked herself in. She seems to be asleep, though." "Well, it was expected. Girls want their privacy. We couldn't have made you keep barging in there anyways. We're gonna have to talk to her soon." I turned in my spot down in the living room again. What did she mean? They were going to talk to me? Were they planning on letting me in whatever this sick scheme was? Braun seemed to know all right, and I still didn't want to believe what I was seeing. Maybe I thought this was a setup. Maybe they'd sneak around and this was my punishment. Maybe this guy was an actor. Part of me tempted to just come out of the hiding spot and tell them I learned my lesson. But I wasn't actually naive enough to think that was the truth. I knew very well that was happening. Deep down I knew. I just didn't have the strength to accept it. My disbelief was protecting me from the cruelty I was in the process of witnessing. My dad and brother ended up taking care of the stranger. His body fell limp, folding over the staircase. Dad picked him up and proceeded to drag him off to the part of the living room that I couldn't see. Mom smiled at Braun and patted his shoulder. "Sweetie, can you wipe off that for me? Come join us when you're done." My brother nodded, and while Mom walked after Dad, he went into the kitchen, returned with a wet cleaning rag, and started to work on the stain that was now on the floor. Afterwards, he made his way back to my parents. I had no idea where they'd gone exactly, but I figured it was the basement. They'd probably exited through the back door. Once everything was silent, I slid off the closet, went back into my room, and laid down, being wide awake all night. Ever since that happened, I didn't participate at school. I didn't talk to my friends, my brother, my parents. It was obvious that my family knew something was wrong, and they'd try to get me to tell them, but I stayed quiet. I don't know why I didn't speak. Sometimes I actually wanted to, but when I opened my mouth, my mind was suddenly empty. It felt like I had completely forgotten every word that had ever existed. 4 weeks later, the police were at our door. I hadn't been the one to inform them, and I felt terrible about it, but I also couldn't have been happier. I saw them from my windows, and as their car pulled up outside our house, I started to cry then. I knew I should have said something sooner at the time. The guilt was killing me. With every day I kept my mouth shut, I had been scared that they would bring home another one, that someone else was going to die, and it would be my fault for not doing anything. They didn't seem to get anyone else before they were caught, though. It was over, and I was happy. I'm not sure how exactly the police or whoever was on it found out my parents were the ones responsible for the disappearances. They just lured in men and women, responsible for 23 total, and not just around town. Once they had lured them back, they killed them and stripped them of their cash and belongings, and those were just the ones that they had proof of. But I genuinely do hope that was all. Braun and I grew up apart from our mother and father. After what I'd seen, I didn't mind too much. Ever since that night, I'd been scared to death of them, quite literally, as I'd been walking on eggshells in fear of what they'd do to me if I found out or upset them. Braun was never punished for helping them or anything. I'm not even sure if they knew he did so at all. We both got counseling and stuff, and it was a difficult time for both of them. I'm sorry for not wanting to talk about it any more than this. I hope you understand. Either way, I already mentioned I'm writing this because of something that happened recently. It took a long time for Braun and me to reestablish somewhat of a trusting relationship, and I realized that he had been greatly impacted by the things he had seen. I don't know when Mom and Dad started using him to assist them, but I was certain that he had been like me, a scared child who didn't know what else to do. Maybe it started with them simply telling him to cover my ears, and he had investigated to find out too. I had never been afraid of him, for a long time actually, but that's how we slowly started talking again. Nowadays, we're close, or at least we were until yesterday. Braun and I met up for lunch, got ourselves takeout, and ate at his place since that gives us the chance to catch up in private. And that's when he made a suggestion. "You're really pretty these days. You look a lot like Mom, maybe better than her." "Where are you going with this?" I asked, uncertain and a little uncomfortable with being compared to Mom. "You ever think about how Mom and Dad got caught?" Honestly, I don't think about them at all. Of course, but I was wondering. You know how they did it, right? She lured him in, and Dad did the whole ambush thing. You don't make as much as you should, and neither do I. Work sucks, and there's people who have more money on them every day than we make in a month. And most of the time, those people are jerks. He said this so casually, it felt like he was telling me about the weather forecast. I didn't say anything. I simply got out and walked out the door, not stopping to put on my coat. I simply took it outside with me. That was yesterday, and we haven't spoken since. I don't know what to do. Ever since then, I've been asking myself if he played a bigger role in all this. The thought itself seems outlandish, but the more I wonder, the more I feel like there might be something more to it. If anyone who reads this has any idea on what course of action to take here, please share with me. I'm at a loss and I'm scared. There is one thing I keep thinking about in particular. I mentioned it at the start too. Braun would only ever hold my ears shut, meaning he himself would hear everything. I never noticed him showing any kind of distress though. That story, a link to the text of it and the author are in the description, but that was fire. Anyways, guys, I think that's going to do it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, please be sure to press the like button. Let me know in the comments section down below what you thought. As I said, if you like these scary stories, be sure to let me know in the comments section down below. It helps the video do better. Other than that, use code SCRUBBY at the G Fuel. Check out my podcast, The Scuffed Cast, down below. And yeah, on that note, I will see you guys next time. I'm out. Peace. Don't get anyone pregnant if you do. Make sure they're hot.